The past has influence but not control. What do we make of this statement? Well, first of all, words are a crude approximation for the complexity of reality, certainly generalizations like these. And so just on its broadness, it's generally best to view such generalizations as a general direction. So the past doesn't have total control. But if we look at specifics, first of all, we can see that different portions of the past have different portions of control and different portions of influence. So I'm listening to a 90-hour biography of Winston Churchill right now. It's a great series on Audible. And we can see that certain national borders were set in World War I and in World War II. Do those borders control the people or do they influence people? Meaning if you go across the border and are shot because you're crossing the border in a demilitarized zone, for example, is that control or is that influence? Now, my next door neighbor got some ice cream a week ago. Does that control my ability to make this video? No. Does it influence my ability to make this video? No. But if yesterday my video camera broke, does that control my ability to make this video with that camera? Absolutely. And so it depends on which segment of the past. A few years ago, I broke my elbow and have never been able to straighten my arms since that, or my arm since that point, past this point. Now, does the past influence that or control it? Well, what is control? I mean, for it to be a useful symbol of meaning, it has to reference my sphere of influence, right? If I cannot move this because of an event in the past, and that's what we're calling controlling it, then the past has control. And the present has control. Because in the past and in the present, I cannot move this arm. But in other areas, for example, does a father's incest control a woman overeating today? Well, it has influence. In a Kaiser study of the most chronically and regularly obese women, it was found that an astonishing correlation exists between women that compulsively avoided the things that would help them lose weight and being a victim of incest as a child. Now, does it control? No, but it influences, meaning if being attractive is associated with your greatest trauma, certainly a feeling of being completely out of control at 5 years old, then you're going to perhaps compulsively do something that makes you less attractive. And since that's not necessarily a conscious current decision, because the conscious mind might not agree with that strategy, it becomes a compulsive decision to obscure that fact. Now, Lazaris has said something else. All beliefs are true, so pick the ones that work. Does it work to say that the past has influence but not control? I think that's too broad of a statement. I think if you tell someone with a broken leg to get up and walk because the past has lost its control, it's a destructive statement. I think if you tell someone who's an alcoholic to stop going to Alcoholics Anonymous because they may have been an addict before, but now it's just a choice, again, it's not useful. I think that the most effective system of beliefs and system of making decisions is to reference the probability field. In every situation, there is a probability field. In America, 70% of the people are chronically lonely. That's a probability field. And so one can say, relatively reliably, if one wants to join the American pool of cult thinking, of culture, that one has a 70% chance of feeling and being chronically lonely. One has a very high chance of not having any real meaningful friends. And if you have a real meaningful friend where you feel nurtured and safe sharing everything with, it'll be less than 3 if you're an American living the cult memes of the American culture. That's a useful thing to understand, as is the fact that if you go to Vegas and place 100 bets, you have a 98% chance of coming away with little or no money. That's a useful statistic. It's a probability field. And so the question is, if you tell yourself, because every thought changes the probability field, and every action changes the probability field, and every environment changes the probability field. I think the real question is operating with the belief the past does not control you. Does your probability of sustainable well-being go up or down relative to the whole range of possible beliefs, possible structures? So the beliefs are not real. They are in and of themselves probability fields. For example, if you have the belief it will all work out in the end, that's not real. Meaning, did you desperately pray for, this to happen and it didn't happen? Is that working out in the end? Did it ever work out? If you just look at the statistics of a situation, you will see, I believe it all works out in the end, even though a percentage of the time it doesn't all work out as working out was defined in the end. But does that belief work better than the belief it will never work out in the end? And probably, between those two extremes, you're probably going to get better statistics leaning towards the positive. But those are not the full range of beliefs. What about the belief that every part of each person's past has a different amount of control? You could say influence, but is it relevant? For example, every one of us knows people who have died. That's pretty final, particularly if they've been dead for a year. We won't quibble about the fact that people can be resuscitated from an hour under ice with their heartbeat cooled down and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so fine. But if someone has been dead for a year, is that an influence or is that a control? Meaning, how many people have you brought back from the dead? Now, if you take Lazaris' belief that that's not a control, that's an influence, that, maybe, that, with enough prayer, enough visualization, enough 33-second techniques, enough da-da-da-da-da, you can bring them back to life. You can go to the cemetery, take that corpse a year ago, and you can bring them back to life. Well, all beliefs are true, pick the ones that work. That's the exact same as saying all beliefs are not true, so pick the ones that work. It's just the positive spin. All beliefs are true, all beliefs are not true. Well, you can also look at all beliefs are true. This is a finger. That's a belief. This is not a finger. That's a belief. So they're both true. What's the difference between all beliefs are not true and saying this is a finger, this is not a finger? The only thing that changes is, from our perspective, which one seems to be false, right? If we say all beliefs are not true, and I say this is a finger, then that questions that statement because we actually think it is a finger. But if we say that this is not a finger and all beliefs are not true, then it seems to validate it. If we say that all beliefs are true and we say this isn't a finger, seems to invalidate it. If we say it is a finger, then that seems to validate it. But really, you cannot look through such a crude map of reality. Google is a crude map of reality. Turn left here, turn right there. It's very, very crude. What about the snail that was crossing the street? See, that didn't show up on the map. What about the bird that flew by? That didn't show up on the map. What about the name of the kid? What about the grandmother that just died? None of that shows up on the map. It is an incredibly crude map. And language is an incredibly crude map of the underlying reality. It takes over an hour to do a decent job of articulating what's conscious for one person for 1 minute. That's one of the reasons, I'm always about 2,000% behind my thoughts with these videos. Meaning I think something and I think I want to explore that. And it takes 1 or 2 seconds to say that. And we're not done exploring 1 or 2 seconds of ruminations. And we're not doing the best job either. Meaning this could all be gone into in much more detail, and we still wouldn't cover the full area because words are a crude map of reality. And beliefs are structures of words. So they are also a crude map of reality. They are an approximation, particularly when we are in the paradigm of either or beliefs. It's this or it's this. And so that's kind of what we're breaking through is the past has lost its grip. The past is an influence. The past doesn't control you. Okay? So to do that justice with the either or and, the past has not lost its grip. Look at my arm. The past does control you. See, influence at some point becomes control. Lazaris says at another point, that every belief has a threshold, and that a belief is in that threshold is kind of a field of resistance. So Lazaris has said, well, you could walk through walls, but the threshold, i.e. the resistance to walking through walls, is so high that as long as there's a door, walk through the door. But if there's no walls, then if there's no doors, then just by all means, walk through walls. That's another of Lazaris's comments. Now, I have never seen on video anyone, let alone a Lazaris friend, walking through a wall. And certainly for prisoners, stuck in a concrete box, getting COVID, being raped, there aren't any doors. It seems like it would be worth the effort to overcome that threshold of belief. It's just that none of them do. What's Lazaris's explanation? That his ideas don't work, or they haven't heard of his 33-second technique? What's the answer to that? And certainly as a probability field, we can say that if not a single Lazaris friend is walking through walls, and by all means submit the video, then it's not a very useful idea. So all beliefs are true, pick the ones that work. I can't walk through walls. I can walk through walls if I overcome the belief threshold. Which one works better? Well, there are an astounding number of people spending an astounding amount of time trying to walk through various walls with Lazaris techniques, metaphorically. My friend Andrew trying to make money with commodities and the Lazaris techniques, despite the probability field that 80% of people who trade commodities lose money. I would say that, another way that is far more effective to look at things would be to analyze the probability field. So, for example, if you say that 80% of all commodities traders lose money and 20% of people make money, well, those are way better odds if you're moving from the wall walking probability field to the commodity trading probability field. You've got it made if you go from banging your head against walls, 10,000 times a day, and doing various meditations, etc., to do it, and you switch to commodity trading where only 80% of the time you lose money. Because what a probability field does is it gives you a sense of, it informs you, right? So if 8 out of 10 people trading commodities lose money, the first thing it informs you is that you're going to have to work harder or smarter, or both, or you're going to have to be luckier than 8 out of 10 people. And it's not worth entering the field if you're relying on luck, right? Because luck doesn't necessarily play favorites, and luck is letting 8 out of 10 people down, right? You don't want to enter a field like that on luck. So the intelligent question, if you're going to trade commodities, is, are you able and willing to show to yourself, and certainly others if you want to get investment, that you're willing to work harder or smarter than 80% of the people? Now, that shouldn't, I am sure, right? We're all above average in intelligence. We're all above average in being nice. We're all above average in being whatever it is that we are measuring, right? You ask an individual and they are above average. And you ask, well, does that belief work for them, right? Because that's being positive, right? Everyone thinks they're above average. So that's a pretty positive attitude. But does it actually work? It actually sets you up for a tremendous amount of failure. Because if you think, if you hear that the odds are 50-50 and you think you're above average, you're going to apply for that. But you won't necessarily prepare because you think you're already above average, right? Back to Winston Churchill in the Second World War, the British military was above average. And they thought they were still above average based on the past. So they were unprepared for the effectiveness of German U-boats because they weren't in the past. They were unprepared for the effectiveness of German airplanes because they weren't there in the past, right? So if you have overconfidence based on the past, it's positive, but it sets you up for failure, right? You want to do an analysis. So you want to know, of the 20% of people that are winning, that are making money in an environment where 80% of people are losing money, what equipment do they have? What access of information do they have? How many hours a day do they spend? What is their training? What are their practices? What are their protocols for that 20% making money different than the other 80% that are losing money? And an intelligent question would be, can I do as good or better than them to ensure that I'm in that 20%? Because if I can't, if they've got 1,000 gigabit connections, if they've got news feeds, if they've got a 24/7 operation, if they've got 10 people on staff, and if they've got a history of trading and blah, 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 and you've got your smartphone, when you want a dopamine hit, you go on to see what's happening, because that can arouse a chemical reaction, and you do that 10 times a day and instinctively respond with, whatever it is that's driving you at the moment. How is that putting you in that 20% probability field? So a good way to look at a probability field, particularly a negative probability field, is a resistance, a headwind. And are you willing to do what it takes to get over that headwind? Well, that's, if you've never seen or met anyone walking through walls, and it's not necessarily the most productive use of your time, to even think that way, right? You want to look, it'd be nice if you enter a probability field where at least 1% of the people are winning in the way that winning is defined. And so what about letting go of the semantics and the crudeness of whether the past has a lot of influence, no influence? Certainly at the point where you cannot overcome the influence, it seems like control. Like if you're in jail with a 20-year sentence and, you have absolutely no way to get out of jail in the next week. I mean, sure, you could say, well, let's pray for an earthquake or, whatever. It is in the realm of possibility. But if it's not even in the 1% domain of probability, and you've got other things you could possibly do, that seems more constructive. Meaning, for example, if considerably less than 1% of people break out of prison or are rescued by earthquakes or whatever it is. It may not be the best focus of your beliefs and programming and all of that to try and get out of jail. But if you switch your focus to something else and say, how many people have written a good book while in prison? So Solzhenitsyn wrote the Gulag Archipelago and helped break the naivete, the fantasy and romance of a dictatorial version of communism. Because there were many people in the West who were making excuses both for Hitler and for communism, and continue today, despite the mass atrocities that are part of a dictatorial regime that is centrally managed, despite the predictable suffering that has been a part of every long-term dictatorial regime that is centrally managed. It doesn't work as well, which means more suffering for more people on average, right? So it's not a very good approach, but Solzhenitsyn wrote the Gulag while in prison. And so one could overcome that result. There are much more people who get an education or who write a good and useful book while in prison than there are people that broke out of prison permanently. And so, and you can work with the probability field as a very powerful technology. When I was writing my first book, I did a little bit of research and I learned that I think 95%, maybe 99% of all self-published authors lose money. And I thought, I'm not going to worry about that probability, meaning I'm not going to either try or pretend that I'm going to break a 95 to a 99% probability field. I will assume that my books will not make me any money. Let's just let's let the flow of 99% probability have its way. I'm not going to bet that in a field of machine gun fire, that I'd be one of the 1% of people that could run across it and miraculously not get hit. Let's not bet on that one. Rather, I said, let's assume then that I'll lose money on these books. So how about not spending any money? Let's do the book cover myself, have some fun with it, and let's not pay anyone to do anything so that we don't lose that money. And let's have fun with it. And let's do the book that I would enjoy writing and fiddling with. And I won't expect it to make any money. But I won't have signed up for, one of those $10,000 packages that you're supposedly going to get back. Because that's how most of these self-published authors lose money, is they have they hire an editor, they hire this, and they put $10,000, $20,000 into their book, and the vast majority of self-published authors sell less than 100 copies, usually to friends and family, and then they have a pile of books in their garage. Well, I'll assume then that I'll sell 100 copies. So let's do a print on demand rather than order a pile of books. I don't want a pile of books in my garage. When I sell my 5 copies of my book, let's order a few more. Well, that's working with the probability field. Now, I know we're looking at the past having its influence, but there's another video and thing that I want to make, which we'll just get into here, which is Lazaris says that you create your reality with your expectations. And, you know, he said that one strategy some people have is to have low expectations. And then it won't hurt when, you know, when the big expectation doesn't happen. And Lazaris says that's not true. And one of the you know, the criticisms that I have of Lazaris is Lazaris never asks for a show of hands. He will repeat himself, telling you what you know. So he'll say, that lowering expectations doesn't stop the pain of disappointment. He says, you know that. You know that. So he has time, but not for a show of hands, but for his assertion of what you know. Now, this doesn't work in marriages, by the way. If you tell your wife a statement without asking her anything, and then you tell her twice, you know this, right? And then carry on as if that's the end of the conversation. This doesn't work, right? But this is Lazaris's protocol, and it's efficient in the sense that you'd hardly be able to get all the programs per year out per hour of Lazaris's time if there were actually healthy dialogues and debates about this. But here's a classic, very average example of the exact opposite. Meaning, if I had said, as I wrote my first book, this is going to be a bestseller. I'm going to program, I'm going to do Lazaris thing, this is going to be a bestseller. And had spent, $10,000 on a professional this and a professional that, as the vast majority of self-published authors do. They know this is going to get it, and it's a good investment and all that, just like 100% of people going into the restaurant industry, where 70% of them got a business. They know that it's going to work, right? It's going to be wonderful, and crowds and all this stuff. I would have been disappointed and confused. Like, why isn't Lazaris's techniques working? Why isn't this? What's wrong with processing? Why isn't this? Why didn't the 33-second technique? And blah, blah, blah. And it absolutely would hurt, You're going to go up and ask someone on a date, and they're going to say yes and da-da-da-da-da, and then they don't even reply to your email, whatever. It hurts. It hurts more. See, Lazaris even says in another thing that pain is the gap between longing and reality. That's pain. Now, what is an expectation without longing? Now, the bigger the gap, the bigger the pain. Now, people actually are correct. Lowering expectations takes the pressure off, reduces the pain. People are absolutely correct on that. Lazaris is out to lunch statistically. Ask Penny if it hurt less to throw away copies of Lazaris interview books that weren't selling. So Penny's throwing Lazaris books into a dumpster because she printed them and she thought they would sell, but they didn't. And rather than give them to people, donate them to a nonprofit, rather than rather than sell them at a discount, rather than give them to a used bookstore, she threw them into a dumpster because they didn't sell. And you have to ask yourself, did that feel better than saying, well, this is a very niche topic. 99% of all of humanity throughout history has never heard of Lazaris and never will hear about Lazaris. And no one's teaching kids in school to find the best channeled entity when they grow up. And a lot of these techniques are not working very well relative to other techniques. So why don't we just print, why don't we just print 1,000 copies and not risk throwing any away? And if there are more, we'll do another printing. Well, the question is, would it feel better to be pleasantly surprised? And does it feel, do I feel pain that my books have not sold millions of copies? No, absolutely not. I enjoy every little interaction I have had with some 300 people or so around the book. So I don't know, I've had around 300 interactions with people who've read the books, and those have been really enjoyable. And the way I look at it is, if I hadn't written the book, I wouldn't have had those 300 interactions, and I enjoyed them. And I enjoyed writing the book because from the moment I looked at that statistic, I thought, I'm not going to be the person trying to dodge a machine gun line. I'm not going to try and be in that 1%. And I thought, it's not even a matter of can. I don't like going on book tours. I don't like traveling the US town by town promoting a book. I don't like promoting books. I also thought it would be ridiculous. If I can make hundreds of dollars an hour doing landscape design, and I have to have 10 conversations to sell one book for $20 at a profit of 10 or whatever, it's ridiculous to try and take time off work at hundreds of dollars an hour and then go and sell a book. So I thought I don't like doing it. I don't want to lose money on this. I don't want to spend $10,000, and so I'm not going to do it. So, I'm sure you can find examples where what Lazaris is saying is correct, but then we're back to that statement, all beliefs are true, so pick the ones that work. Well, in my idea, you look at the probability. That works really, really well. You look at the probability field, and if you want to win, if that's the goal, in this case, if I had wanted to make money, I would not enter a field where the vast majority of people lose money, if making money was a primary goal. It just doesn't make much sense to me. But knowing that, I saved money. I saved the $10,000. So I did actually join the very minority of people who made money as a self-published author. Why? Because I made a few $1,000s selling my book, and I never spent more than $200 on any one book. I let friends edit it, and I had 3 friends edit it so they'd all catch different mistakes for free, rather than hire a professional editor, which had multiple benefits. No hiring an editor, and then I get to talk with my friend about my book. So I did actually join that, 1% of people who, as self-published authors, make money just by not spending more than $200 per book, period, and structuring it that way. rather than programming that I'd, make millions with the book. Lazaris even speaks to that. He says you can't earn enough money. You have to become an investor and then you can become rich. But that's at odds with other things Lazaris said, which is you create your reality and you create the consequence of reality. So on the one hand, Lazaris is saying you could be a librarian and save up all your librarian salary and become rich, or program and get $1 million a year raise, if you really wanted $1 million a year raise as a librarian. But then in another area, he points out the statistics, which are correct. Most people make their money by investing. A lot of it has been in real estate. So Jach, as I understand it, has made a tremendous amount of his money in real estate as well. That's intelligent, but it has nothing to do with needing Lazaris or 33-second techniques. It's just you look at the probability field and you ask yourself a couple of things. What do I want to have happen here? What are the odds of that happening? Another scenario, when I was doing online dating in the US, I realized that I was dealing with terrible odds. That there was less than a 1% chance of having the kind of interaction I wanted with an American woman on an American online dating site based on the statistics, meaning I'd had 1,000 interactions and about 1 or 2% of them were generative, and the rest were draining. They were negative from my perspective. So the 2% couldn't make up for the 98% that were, I wish I hadn't had those interactions at all, rather than trying to have that. So I recognize this is the statistics. And sure, I could change that 2% to 4%. And I did some experiments to see, what women respond to. See, but I don't agree with what American women respond to. I've worked out that the best relationships begin on a transparent, kind of skeptical footing. What I mean by that is, if a woman will tell me this is my trigger point, I've had a really difficult time in this area, and I can't stand this and I love this. This makes me feel completely and totally loved. This makes me feel miserable. These are the patterns going on in my past 3 relationships. And the reason my last relationship didn't work was this, and this. So that's kind of, and what I'm wanting is this, and this. If a woman will say that to me, first of all, I can tell in a few minutes if I'm part of her negative pattern or not. And often I am, right? Because people are going through their patterns and they're part of the probability field. And I'll say, well, you're pretending that I'm not like your ex-boyfriend, but if you talk with my ex-girlfriends, they would tell you that I'm very like your ex-boyfriend. So you're coming to me saying and pretending and assuming that I'm different, but based on what you've told me, I'm part of your pattern. Meaning you say you're tired of men talking too much. Well, I talk a lot, so you strike one, right? You want a man who it doesn't get too emotional about this and and just takes it easy. Well, I'm very intense. People complain about that. So strike 2. Well, then I want this and this. And I can just say, well, this is part of your pattern. Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to look at where the blind spot is, why you're drawn to me? That's the exact opposite of what you say you want. Do you want to look at that? Well, they never do, right? It's bizarre because no other man is going to ever talk to them like that. So why are they missing their life, once in a lifetime opportunity to see the blind spot? That's bizarre. They're nuts, in other words, right? Recreating the pattern, setting, and the reason I like doing these things is, who wants to go into a year in that and then hear all men are because they've picked another person who's similar to their pattern? It's nuts. But also, they'll go on to another man, probably the exact same part of their pattern, who will pretend that they're not part of their pattern, and enjoy the honeymoon phase of the relationship, and then say, "Oh, you're part of the pattern." I mean, that's so boring. But how many women actually want to know why and how they're picking the people that are part of their pattern? Not many. And how many want to know the cues and how they participate in the pattern? Because I'm also a different person depending on who I'm with, and I find that interesting. And so I watch, how do I become around a particular woman? And I find that interesting. So do you want to know how you're rewarding me for being this way and not this way? Because this other lover is rewarding me for this way and not this way. And so I'm moving in that direction. And do you want to know? Well, most women don't want to know that either, right? They want, so then they reject me for bringing that up. They're very happy to have sex with me if I don't bring it up. But I find the whole thing nuts. You want to have sex with a person you're going to punish later. Not interested, right? So this is a statistic. And it's a different statistic in Denmark. It's a different statistic in Italy. It's a different statistic in Russia. And it's a different statistic in Thailand. And it's a different statistic in the Philippines. So in Thailand and the Philippines, for example, I can have 1,000% more quality time with a person spontaneously. In other words, I can be 1,000% more feminine and be honored and supported in that. All I have to do is get in a plane or change dating sites. Don't have to program this and that, this is the probability field here, and it's not nourishing me. Here's the probability field here. And my energy is up, my well-being is up. And so what's the price? Well, it's time off work. It's 18 hours each way, but 300% higher quality of life. The food is 300% better. The ambiance, the amount of empathy is 300 to 1,000% higher. The quality time is 1,000% higher. The costs in dollars, 40% lower. See, what we're talking about is not creating your own reality and picking the outcome. It's understanding the probability field and deciding which probability field you want to be a part of, and also deciding if you're willing, if you want to change a probability field. And I have done this, for example, I invited 341 San Francisco Bay Area women to create a peak experience together. 2 said yes. 6 sent vitriol. 4 said it was a great idea. They were going to do it with somebody else. The vast majority ignored it altogether. And the 2 that said yes, we created 2 amazing days of peak experience. And they both loved it. It was fantastic, right? So I know that I can recreate that. Meaning if I'm willing to write and send 341 women, I can get 2 peak experiences. But that's such a miserable perspective, right? I'm in a group of people in which 98% of the people, 99% of the people would reject me on the basis that I'm starting with a peak experience rather than with a mediocrity of coffee. That is such a miserable statistic. Well, in Thailand, it's very different. 60% to 70% can, in a very spontaneous way, create a higher peak experience than I might be capable of here. And, who cares if they're sexual or not? It's just the conscious design of a peak experience. Well, that's a pretty big obstacle to overcome. 99%? That's draining. That's 99 people depleting energy so that one person can give some of it back, but they don't give all of it back. And not a single woman anywhere on the globe has ever initiated the request to have a peak experience with me. That's also insane. But that is an astonishing statistic. 10,000 interactions with women. Not a single one thought that was a good idea anywhere on the globe. Hey, Dane, let's create a peak experience together. Astounding. That's confirmation that we're nuts as a cult. Because that's intelligent, but it's not average. It's not normal. It's not a norm. It's not a meme going around our cult to invite peak experiences. So, that's not very good. So if no one's going to invite them, then you want to be in the place, you give up on peak experiences, how boring, or you want to be in the place where you receive little resistance and high reward for suggesting a peak experience. Well, that's common sense. But notice we're entirely within the framework of probability fields. And that's my that's my point. That probability fields are a much more effective way of assessing something than whether or not the past has ended or the past is creating a reality or the future is creating reality. Now, you could look through that lens. You could say, I want to be in a future where I have more peak experiences. But, by the way, that was enormously painful for me. I had high expectations that once I figured out how to create a peak experience, which I did, it's not hard. Once I figured out how to create a peak experience with an 80% probability that both people would have a peak experience, let's say 70% just to be safe, a 70% probability that both people would have a peak experience if they followed this recipe. You'd think that was the hard part, to figure out how to create a peak experience with almost anyone. No, that's easy. But then to find that not a single person invites a peak experience and 99% of your home people, because one of the people who said yes was Russian. She was the one who said she thought it was too good to be true. She said she almost didn't respond because she said, this is so wonderful, so incredible. I almost thought, it's hardly real. I mean, this is just amazing. So that was the Russian. The American, kicking and screaming until the front door, and then we had a peak experience, right? So, that's so. Does having high expectations decrease pain? I don't think high expectations followed by disappointment, creating the gap between longing and reality, which is pain, is worse than reducing your expectations to a framework where you are winning within the context of that expectation. For example, my wife loses at chess, and she apparently hates it. She hates losing at chess, but she loses at chess most of the time. Her tantrum about that goes down if I suggest, hey, why don't we both win together at having a bonding together? If you have another thing you'd like to do, let's do that. But don't look at this as you're losing at chess. Look at it as we're spending time as a couple. And if you don't want to spend time as a couple, then go do something else. But if you want to spend time as a couple, we're winning. We're both winning here. Having high expectations, this time I'm going to win, it just doesn't add up. So Lazaris says that we know it. I don't. I don't know it. I know that expecting my books to sell an average of 200 copies, mostly to people I bump into, and that my book will save me repeating myself. That's also what these videos are about for me, is I don't enjoy repeating myself. I like going through a thought process once or twice and refining it to the point where I can understand what I'm saying. And then having it in a book or a video so that I don't have to either feel invisible or drained repeating myself. That's how I started getting into the book thing, was people kept saying, oh, that's so great. And then another person would say, oh, that's so great. Another person would say, oh, and I'm just saying the same thing. It's getting boring for me. Here's a book. You can read that, right? So I don't expect any of my books to make enough money to be worth considering them financial ventures, meaning I have to take time off of work at hundreds of dollars an hour to go write. And I think it's absurd to set out to try and make more money writing with that. That doesn't mean I'll feel bad if that happens at some point and I beat all those odds, and I happen to be in that 1%, but I'm certainly not going to spend any energy on that. And so I feel like a winner. I avoided losing money. That 99% of people lose money. I didn't have my expectations dashed when everyone didn't want to read my book. I don't have garages of books. I have, 5 books. I've written several books at this point. And the conversation comes up and a topic's in there that I don't really want to say over again, but someone's interested in. Here's a book, right? And, selling it for $20 a book, it at least pays for the shipping and all that of the book, and that's it. So low expectations that are consistent, well, let me put it this way. Expectations that are consistent with the probability field, right? Because we could take it to the extreme, like, I don't know about you, but no one I know can walk through walls, but let's just, bang up against here. How long do you want to do that before high expectations become a waste of time? This time I'm going to get through the wall. This time, right? And I enjoyed the movie, what was it, Staring at Goats, or killing goats with, anyway, that movie about the U.S. military. There was a general in the U.S. military who probably would have gotten on great with Lazaris, who about 10, 15 times a day would try and run through walls with his psychic powers so that he could, get funding and research for the U.S. military. The Men Who Stare at Goats, I think, is the movie. And I think, they sat around enough and eventually got a goat to collapse with dehydration. It's it's hard to see this consistent with the path of sustainable, conscious learning to have fun and consciously create success. If your goal is to kill a goat, a revolver is going to be far more successful. And if you have a life, perhaps a little bit more fun, sending hatred to a goat for hours a day. These are some of the things that, in my kind of very cursory analysis, kind of around age 28, because I started with Lazaris when I was 13. And then, there were enough of these build-ups by 28, and encountering other Lazaris friends, et cetera, to say this is not a statistical probability field where if you meet a Lazaris friend, they're going to be intelligent or successful or great to be in relationship with, or there's none of that probability field, right? The only thing that goes up dramatically as a probability field is if you meet a Lazaris friend, the odds are much higher than average that they will be doing something that isn't working, that has not been working for some time, and they will attempt to be overcoming that probability field with Lazaris techniques. Now, races, Olympics and all of that, are those types of, horrible probability fields, right? If you want to be the fastest person in the world in 2026 Olympics or whatever it is, you've got a billion to 1 chance of doing it, right? Or, in the very broadest sense. If you start out really fast and you start winning medals and stuff, then it may move into, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, and then 1 in 1,000, and then 1 in 100, and then 1 in, the 30 people racing or whatever it is. And, those aren't great odds to dedicate your entire life to. I would never do it unless I wouldn't do it. I don't get the whole, looking at the biography, of someone spending 15 hours a day and all focused on the win, whether it's the win of getting into the Olympics or not. I really don't care if I'm run slowly. It's not worth the price. But these are the things that, led me to question, what am I doing spending all this time learning Lazaris techniques that in my own life are not working any more than I see them working over here and over here. I did a Lazaris meditation this morning, right? So, I'm thinking these things through on these videos. But, the reality is that Lazaris is the #1 winner for me of anything in one area, which is to enter an imaginal domain in a very creative and high resonance that's feels very true, very beautiful, very good. So I can enter an imaginal domain in a Lazaris meditation. Sometimes I'll jump off from whatever Lazaris is doing in meditation, and I'll create my own meditation as a jump-off point, meaning I like where I'm going more than I like what Lazaris is doing. But I wouldn't have jumped off if it wasn't for Lazaris. So that's saying, that's useful. The same is true for something like this. You see, if you formulate your opinion more clearly in your argument with me about my opinion, that's been useful, right? You've made a series of choices more crisply, more carefully thought out as a result of listening to someone you disagree with. That's intelligent, right? So it's useful, right? So even if I go a different way, this is still useful. You have to start somewhere. And in evolution, everything that comes later transcends what was there before. So, if this doesn't improve a tape in the 80s for a Lazaris, then it's not part of evolution, right? And if Lazaris doesn't improve whatever the status quo that he's starting in it, that's not evolution either, right? It's just a failed experiment. Evolution is, first of all, understanding what is evolving is largely consciousness. And human consciousness is all founded in language, because all thought is framed in language. You cannot think of thought without words. And words are a crude map of reality. And they are not reality. They're a crude map of reality. So to evolve consciousness, one learns more artistry with words, basically, that take words to a more sophisticated level than when they arrived, when you inherited them, because you inherit words. This is what Dad said, this is what Mom said. If you can take those to a higher level of intelligence, meaning the words correlate more strongly with the map, that's one positive direction. They reveal more detail, that's another positive direction. So we're talking about intricacy or complexity. We're talking about integration or integrity. But if you've got an accurate map of reality, the innate drive to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse that is at the heart of every human being will work its own magic, right? Will evolve itself. You want to feel good, and you're doing the things that some part of you has experienced or believes is the best way to do that. And there's always a better way. There's always a better way. There's always a better way. Everything we're doing today will be viewed as primitive, hopefully, in 1,000 years from now. Because we're wasting so much energy to create so much unnecessary suffering that, we're so far from perfect that there's so much room to evolve. And although Lazaris has made the statement that they are the highest resonance to ever touch the planet, they haven't made the statement that their teachings are the best. In fact, even in 40 years, they've changed their own models of reality. Lazaris did that on the Scars of the Past tape, where he said, do your this and this and this, and then, do the causal plane meditation. If it doesn't work, you didn't want it. And he said that's because you wouldn't have understood scars at the point when they began channeling. Now, that is a little bit of an endless rat race of its own that I somewhat criticize, because while there are no objective measurements taken of the inner or outer success and fun of all friends associated with Lazaris and all people working with Lazaris material, no one's gathering or sharing that data. That's not a good sign, by the way. Governments hide surveys when the news isn't good. They don't ever hide great, stunning news. So it's not a good sign that this is not being gathered and shared. And you can certainly find a link to, a survey below to be a part of sharing that. Because to my knowledge, in the absence of anyone being able or willing to do it, and because I consider the understanding of probability fields to be so important in assessing things, I'm gathering that information. And unlike a pharmaceutical company, I won't suppress the studies that that don't favor my biases. But it would be wonderful if we had more information about what does and doesn't work. So, but I haven't found a more beautiful way to visualize and meditate anywhere in my time on the earth than Lazaris meditations. The music, the voice, the resonance. And so if I look at that as, we all have X number of minutes before we will die in this lifetime, and spending, maybe 1% of my minutes or something like that in a Lazaris meditation of some kind or other, and that's some of the highest, visions and stuff that I have seen anywhere. Well, that's something to be grateful for and, appreciate, even if not, every other thing is nuts, for example, and I don't think it is. I think some of it is crude, some of it is confusing, but it's all a spark for debate and ideas. So I will leave it there.